Thank you for joining Think, Build, Launch podcast. This is an extension of Marl Accelerator. Marl Accelerator is an early-stage accelerator fund for startups developing deep tech products and services for enterprise customers that are using 5G technology. Marl aims to create a community of investors, founders, and corporate venture teams in sectors like mobility, AR, VR, autonomous, robotics, and logistics. We invest in next generation of founders that are reshaping the world of enterprise. Our program, Think, Build, Launch, features members of the Marl community, including founders, service providers, and investors. In fact, today's program is actually, we have an investor. So we're going to call today from serial and entrepreneurship to marketing mastery, insights from our guest, Brian Smiga. Brian is a serial entrepreneur and expert in marketing. He's a principal at Alpha Partners. He's an advisor to so many groups. There's the Prickster Group on venture capital, a deal organization on relationships. Prior to Alpha Partners, Brian was the founder and CEO of PreClick that actually sold to Smilebox, where he developed photo software licensed worldwide by HP, 3M, SanDisk, Walmart, Costco, CVS, and Walgreens. Prior to PreClick, Brian was also the CEO at 3Path and early Dropbox, and an Intel and Goldman Sachs-backed startup, and the SVP of marketing at One Click Charge and Early Bold, where his product launch resulted in the sale of the company. Brian is also the founder of TEDx Ashbury Park, which is one of the top-rated tech conferences of the U.S. East Coast, and he's a board member of the Ruth Burt Fund, a scholarship grant program for graduate students whose daily actions are actually guided by spirituality. It's not often that I get to talk to someone that's been a coder, that is really invested in so many startups that actually got sold, right? And then someone that's also working with a TEDx organization to actually create and sponsor ideas that actually create communities that build capacity. So Brian, welcome to Think, Build, Launch.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's great to be here. Beautiful Friday afternoon.
Yeah, isn't it? It is wonderful. And where are you located? We're in Rochester, New York right now.
So I'm on the New Jersey shore at my home.
Oh, wow.
Our office is at the Empire State Building. That's Alpha Partners, the growth fund I co-founded in 2012. And I commute by ferry to New York.
Oh, wow. So you get the water and the clouds. When I looked out the window, I thought the clouds are just really, really beautiful today. So yeah, you have such an impressive track record as a serial entrepreneur and marketer with, successful ventures like PreClick and 3Path. Can you share some of your key lessons that you learned on your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, I think I always was a pioneer, and you know what they say about pioneers, arrows in the back. So I was early with the products I created. Early CRM, 1989. It's in the San Jose Computer Hall of Fame Museum, but that didn't make me rich. So I think that being early, one really needs to understand not only the product market fit, but how ready is the market, and then adjust the capitalization, the growth of the company accordingly. I think a lot of founders who go early don't really understand market readiness. Now, of all the gurus on this topic, I think Jeffrey Moore, who's been around for 30 years, remains the best model, which is the technology adoption curve as expressed in his books, Crossing the Chasm and Inside the Tornado. And I think everyone should have that framework that is a founder.
If some people haven't read that framework yet, is there a soundbite you could give to us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very simple. And in fact, the best way to learn it is through Inside the Tornado, where he summarizes Crossing the Chasm in a single chapter. And as with so many business books, that's really all you need. Crossing the Chasm is more of a product manager's book. Inside the Tornado is more of a CEO strategy, business development book. Okay. It says that the general population has early adopters and techies that adopt products when they're not fully done. And this can create a false positive where the very first market are the techies. These are folks that search for products in a sector of interest, and they're willing to forgive missing components, missing pieces, problems with the solution. So they're very forgiving, they're early adopters, but they're technical. The next market, which represents about 6% of the market, are early adopters. These are folks that will follow the techies and actually pay you money for products, but they're willing to take risk. So this technology adoption curve, which looks at the population, is all about risk. Techies and early adopters will take more risk, but they only represent about 7% of the market. So you might be able to sell those, but never get to the early majority. Now, the early majority adopt because people like them buy. So they're looking for evidence like, we are now adopted by 5 of the top 10 in vertical sector XYZ. Mm-hmm. They're looking for that herd mentality, that people like them have done the research, done the homework, because they're not gonna. They're also not going to take that much risk. So then after you master the early adopter market, at which point you're probably a pretty big company, then you need to, the early adopter and the early majority, then you need to do the mid-majority who are looking for more value. So anyway, it's a very simple bell curve of adopters, really easy to understand, and it applies perfectly for B2B, and it applies pretty much for B2C as well.
You know, I was thinking after you were saying, I think Simon Sinek does a really good job talking about that as well. But let's get back to you. I really like, the fact that you were someone early. It reminded me of Oscar Wilde, who had this wonderful quote. I don't know if you remember this one. It was a dreamer can only find his way by moonlight. His punishment is that he sees the dawn before the rest of the world. How is it to always be ahead of the curve and to have to be patient? How did you learn that patience?
Well, I think all entrepreneurs are a blend of impatience and patience, and they're outliers for the general population in that they're generally more dissatisfied, more impatient than most people. And I think the best entrepreneurs overcome their impatience and their sometimes attention deficit disorder to become maniacally focused on the problem that caused them a pain point, or where they observed a pain point that they just had to go fix. Mm-hmm. So I think becoming an Olympian and best at the world at something requires a lot of discipline, a lot of patience, a lot of time. The good news about entrepreneurs is they get to wake up every morning starring in their own hero's journey, meaning they're the protagonist in a movie, and they're going to go fulfill the hero's journey, the quest. But it's a quest of their own design. Mm-hmm. They're solving a problem they've decided is big enough, and that they and their team have the right solution, that they're going to go win at that battle, at that quest. So it's a very exciting self-actualized role to be an entrepreneur.
That's great. It's intriguing that you've worked in both early stage startups and large corporations like HP, 3M, and Walmart. How has your approach to marketing and product development differed in those environments? And I almost think it's kind of like I'm talking to a version of Steve Jobs, who was both a technologist and a marketer. And it sounds like that's what you do as well.
Well, thanks for that compliment. No, I never worked as an employee of any large company.
Okay.
And I wouldn't last at a large company as an employee, except if I was running their venture arm. And I think that's true of most entrepreneurs. I think this idea of intrapreneur, the corporate citizen who's going to go out and innovate, is a false one. I think most of the innovations from big companies, whether it's Nokia or 3M or HP, come from outside, because one needs that freedom to experiment and fail, regardless of the corporate ladder and the corporate hierarchy. One has to be able to insulate oneself from the naysayers. I was lucky enough and focused on having those big companies as my customers, which was a joy. And it was a mutual respect between me, the disruptive entrepreneur, solving a problem for HP, etc. One has to be careful, though. Sometimes HP has a massive dike that has a leak in it, and they're bringing you in with your product to put your finger in the dike, but they're not going to give you the job of tackling the whole market where they have a problem. You are a temporary solution. So that's something to be careful of.
Okay. Well, and I think, how is your approach then? I guess that you were successful selling into those organizations. Is there anything that you can teach our startups about how to create an approach to begin to build some of those relationships that you were just talking about?
Empathy. One has to put yourself in the shoes of both the corporation and the division of the corporation that's bringing you in, and then the team you're selling to, and then understanding what consensus they need to build in this risk-avoidant culture to get your solution bought. And so it's a lot of psychology and empathy, thinking about how do they look at the problem from a shareholder value perspective or from a success perspective. Do you have a champion who's willing to go against the grain and against consensus to bring you in? And are you giving that champion the tools they need? Because you'll never convince the naysayers, only they can do it. So a lot of this is attractive in that you're making friends. And they're valuable and high-placed friends. But I think empathy and putting yourself in the shoes of others, that includes when you pitch. I think when you pitch, you want to establish, I'm Brian Smiga, and I'm here to talk about this solution. I've now defined it. Now let's ask you a bunch of questions. And what we're trying to do is discover what challenges they have. Before we even describe our product or our team or our bona fides or our intellectual property, it's got to be all about them, whether you're raising money for a venture fund or you're selling nascent technology.
So just to make sure that our listeners are unpacking, some of what you're saying here is that a lot of startups prepare and they're prepared to talk about their technology, but they don't necessarily customize to the person they're speaking with, and that you're inviting people to pay more attention to who they're speaking with. Is that right?
That is totally correct. And one has to recognize that it's natural. You're desperate. You're running out of money. Mm-hmm. You sacrifice and sweat it so much to create the solution you're so proud of, which is not fully baked. And that's all you want to talk about. But that's not the way to win customers. You gotta listen, you gotta ask questions, you gotta be curious, you have to have empathy, you have to make friends, you have to play the long game, because if they don't buy this year, they might buy 3 years from now. In some ways, you're collecting a set of customers, so you're showing your investors in the market and other customers there's a pattern of buying. Every bullet in your belt, every customer you win becomes a pattern.
So I almost think that you might have if there's a pattern like that, you probably have a flight plan then in terms of when you're on a startup, and then also when you're thinking of who to fund. So if people are designing their flight plan to have that kind of pattern and that execution excellence that you're talking about, what are some key indicators? Like, what would you advise people have?
Yeah. So once again, I'm going to cite Jeffrey Moore, spelled with a G, because in his book, he talks about the bowling alley.
Okay.
And the bowling alley is going after your defined product into a set of defined, say, enterprise applications. And you might have hunches that you're going to sell well into financial services and health services, for example. Mm-hmm. And you got to run a series of experiments to see if you can get a head pin. Maybe it's not in financial service. Maybe it's in health services. What you want to do is not commit to a market until you see this vertical acceptance of your product. And then you want to get 3 head pins. And once you get 3 head pins, then you can knock down 10 more. So I think it's about mapping the market, running a series of experiments to figure out which kind of companies at what size and with what titles are the buyers. That's going to take experimentation. But as soon as you get traction, then you need to say, okay, I'm going to get 3. That's the bowling alley strategy.
Wow. I feel like I need to read that book and then have you back on just so I can go deeper into that. That's a great. So let's see. You've also co-authored several software patents and licensed some top-rated software. Can you please share some insights into collaboration software and its significance in today's digital workplace?
Yeah, I think that the nature of work has really changed in our lifetimes, and people are adopting more of a Silicon Valley meritocratic relationship to work, which means that I think they're more willing to and open to share ideas, not violating their NDAs, of course. And so I think cross-organizational collaboration partnerships are becoming increasingly important with every decade. So collaborating across corporate borders, I think, is really critical. And this open-mindedness of each successive generation, their willingness to quit for another job, their insistence that they have the right balance of purpose, as well as remuneration and security, I think is a trend that's not going away unless we have a major economic crisis. It's just the evolution of the population as they become more educated, as tech and textile companies occupy more of the S&P and the GDP. I mean, tech is now 20% of the economy. When I started my career, it was 2%. It's a tenfold increase. Everybody knows all the big tech names. This year in the stock market, 7 names held up the stock market. So you think about the people that work at Apple and Google and Facebook and Meta, right? That's what the population is becoming like. Maybe just a little bit, right? But I think this is where collaboration and meritocracy and cross-company partnership is ascendant.
And, I think this is a nice segue in terms of the cross-pollination and collaboration. Your background, you really come more from a liberal arts and philosophy background.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how much that shaped your perspective here and how, the diversification of the background influenced your approach to problem solving and entrepreneurship.
I don't really know, but Steve Jobs also came from a liberal arts background, didn't even finish his bachelor's. I think a liberal arts background makes people pattern recognizers and probably stronger than normal communicators. And I think a little bit willing to go against the grain and against their chosen profession because they are from the liberal arts. It's broad, it's multidisciplinary. They're looking at many aspects, a lot of which are psychology, sociology, and other things that inform company building and marketing. For me, it was also the ability to speak and pitch. And that's following listening, as I said earlier. So this ability to listen empathically, but then consolidate what you learned from listening into a very customer bespoke pitch that's just for the person you're talking to. I think that also was better informed, for at least for me, from a liberal arts education than not.
And I'm thinking in 2017, I remember reading that they were just beginning to feed AI novels to try and teach kind of that empathy piece. And I'm wondering, how much of our storytelling and ability to be, readers and well-read impacts our ability to have that kind of empathy that you're talking about. Because it's a hard core competence to build, but it's it's when it's, you know what I mean? How would you build it, or how do you help the people that you advise that may not be as good of communicators or be as well read as you are? How do you invite
okay, I think sometimes it can be quite mechanical in that, let's say you're creating a pitch deck for a startup, because we have an audience here of founders. I think identifying what you do very succinctly, identifying the market problem that's felt by your customer up front. So it's not about your company. It's not about you. It's not about your team. It's not about your intellectual property. It's not about your shiny solution. It's about the problem out in the world that your customer faces. Then you go into the questioning where you identify how acute is their pain. Do they have pain here? Do they have pain there? You are a doctor. You are prescriptive. You are a challenger that's going to challenge them to think about their pain points. And then if they're open, and by the way, people are only open to answering your questions about themselves in the first 30% of a meeting.
Ooh.
In the second 70% of the meeting, they're wanting to get you out of there, or they're wanting to be done, or they're thinking about what they're doing next. In the first 30% of the meeting, they are polite, they are open, they are making friends. It's also novel, like it's a fresh experience. You and your company are a fresh experience. You're going to be stale at the halfway point. So you really got to get your questions, your difficult questions, your challenging questions to them in the first 30% of the meeting. And then, and only then, do you take the wraps off your product, your solution, your team, your bona fides, your intellectual property, and your plan, if you're raising money, to go create a big company.
My gosh. I think you just inverted the pyramid that we're all taught.
Well, trust me, this is how it works.
I believe you. I just don't know that everyone's being coached with this insight.
But this is very simple, right? Like anyone could follow what I just said. So I hope your readers will try it out and work with their coaches and their advisors. And the other thing to do, I think, is really important is do mock rehearsals, right? Like it's like being an athlete. If your pitch and a 30-minute meeting, you don't want to be talking more than 12 minutes. You can rehearse that and get it down to muscle memory. You know where you ask questions and shut up. You know where you ask follow-on questions because you didn't just mechanically ask the question, take notes, and then go plow right back into your pitch. You ask follow-up questions because it's the follow-up questions, it's the deeper questions where you really get the goods.
Yeah, no, that's really great. One last question. I mean, having a TEDx brand that you got and you had a vision for, what is the theme for the region and what got you into that process?
I was fortunate enough when I was starting a company in 2000 that someone couldn't make it to the TED conference. And it was the year that Chris Anderson was taking over from the originator, Richard Saul Warman. So at that TED conference, I spent, a precious $4,000 going to it. I made so many friends and potential investors and other founders. At that time, when you went to the TED conference, you literally could have a conversation with Larry Page and Sergey Brin and Eric Schmidt and Jeff Bezos, literally. So it's not that good today, honestly. But I became friends with Chris Anderson, who really he's the one who transformed the TED conference to what it is today by open sourcing it. He open sourced all the content, spreading ideas worth spreading, right? And he also created the TEDx model, which emulates the very expensive TED conference regionally. So I just wanted to bring this magic, having attended 3 times, having been a sponsor, having produced content for the big TED conference. I wanted to bring it to my local community. And I got to tell you, it's way too much work producing a TEDx conference because there's no shortcuts. You're bringing 12 plus, maybe 20 more speakers to a region. you're putting them up, you're coaching them, you're shooting their videos, you're editing their videos, you're selling your tickets. There's no way you can raise a budget to pay your team to do it. You've got to beg people to do all it, but it's intensely interesting. However, having produced the largest TED conference on the East Coast for 10 years, with a net promoter score that's like 77, which is like above Amazon, I can say it was worth it. I've made so many friends, from the governor of New Jersey, who essentially did his pre-campaign speech at my TED conference, to the CEO of Audible, to unknowns that you all don't know, but I value having them in my circle, many founders, etc. So anyway, that's been a real joy, and I encourage people to produce a TEDx in their region. Just don't become the overall executive director if you're also a founder. It's way too much work.
I love it. Well, I think I might be doing a road trip for the next TEDx Ashbury Park, which sounds amazing. You've been listening.
Here it is. Here's a plug for it. It's April 20th, 2024.
All right.
It's in the newly renovated Bell Theater, which is located in the historic landmark of Bell Labs in Humdale, New Jersey. It is one of the finest modern office architectures in the world. Look it up. It goes by the name Bellworks today. It is absolutely a stunning building. It's a cathedral to innovation.
Here we go. Well, we're going to put this program out right when you tell me they're available tickets, and I'm going to make sure that after I get my ticket for sure. You've been listening to Brian Smiga from Alpha Partners. We would like to thank the Marl community and especially this program. Shout out to Alpha Partners. Alpha Partners co-invests with the world's best VCs by sharing economics with early stage VCs. I'd also like to thank our producer, Scott Fitzgerald at Rockfox Studio here in Rochester, New York, the home of optics. If you have an idea or want to know more about our program, connect with me, Jennifer, at Marl Accelerator. Please subscribe to our program, and we will continue to share insights on how to frame your value position, which we heard a lot about today, raise capital, and design for scale. This is Jennifer Sertle. Thank you so much for joining us.